Let's give it up for Lisa.
Thanks. Okay, so the name of this talk is There and Back Again, A Functional Programmer's Tale. And it's just going to be a story. It's a lightning talk. This is my spirit animal, but this is also like my work avatar, so this is like me. Quick background, my name is Lisa. I've been at Kickstarter for about 2 years now, working as a native engineer, and in the past year, I've given a couple of talks on how we've leveraged functional programming and laziness to develop our Android and iOS apps. And laziness, like as Matt mentioned, like in the Haskell sense of laziness, like lazy evaluation and stuff. And embracing the use of functional programming to write efficient, composable, and testable code using nifty operators provided by the RxJava and Reactive Cocoa libraries in our apps. So when I started, we wrote our Android 1.0 app using the RxJava library. And we actually started being really functional at Kickstarter first in our Android repo, even though like y'all are probably here because you've seen functional stuff in our iOS repo. And we architected our Android app in a model view model way right off the bat. It was actually model view presenter at first, but then we changed the name. And so we had a one view model file for every activity, and an Android activity is sort of like the view controller with inputs and outputs that handled all of our logic. And we tried to make our views as dumb as possible. And the best part of this was that we actually had test coverage, which was shocking for an Android app. And iOS, I bet. So after Android 1.0 released, we found it really hard to go back to our legacy Objective-C code base, which was written pretty much solo by Brandon, so that was another tricky thing for our newly formed team to adapt to. And we'd learned a lot of great things from building Android in a model view model way, and so we felt it was worth it to make a pretty big technical investment of totally rewriting our iOS app in Swift. And what a great opportunity it was to write it in the same MVVM way. After all, we already had a full guidebook of how to write it, which was our Android app. And so we did it. We scorched the earth and we released iOS 3.0 in Swift in little under a year after releasing Android 1.0. And essentially, we just refined our work that we did in Android. We used the same MVVM inputs, outputs pattern, and we were even able to do some test-driven development. But of course, we wrote it in Swift, and that allowed us to leverage some pretty cool Swift features like playgrounds. And by the end of last year, snippets of our code started looking pretty similar. The top is Java 6, and the bottom is Swift. And this was great for our pretty small team of like junior, mid-level, senior, like mix of engineers, because looking at Java code and Swift code, no matter who you are, side by side can sometimes make your eyes bleed. And so we started finding happiness in functional programming as native engineers. But then it was time for me to go back to Android development, which is what I've been doing full-time since the beginning of this year. And the transition was a little rough. The nice things like that we really take for granted in Swift are like optionals, default parameters, and first-class enums, like Conrad mentioned. None of these are first-class in Java 6. But luckily, even before we began writing our Android code base there was already a new player developing, the Kotlin language, which is a new JVM language developed by JetBrains, in case you all don't know, that looked really funky when we were starting to write Android in Java 6, but looked really familiar after writing in Swift. So the timing kind of worked out really well for us because by the beginning of this year, we had all learned how nice it was to have first-class functional programming support or like tidbits of it in a language like Swift, as well as the little things like optionals and default parameter values. And so we were ready, in a way, to use Kotlin. And when the opportunity arose to explore implementing a class like an either type, which is what these snippets are from, and now the top is Kotlin and the bottom is Swift 3, we jumped into writing Kotlin because we're very excited about things like that. And briefly, either is a type that takes either a left or a right value of different types. And an example of where this comes in handy is like, say in our Kickstarter app, when we load up the comments screen, commenting can happen on either a project or an update. And if we want to reuse the same view controller for just comments, we can just use an either type for that. And so here's a snippet of the case analysis. Yeah, top is written in Kotlin, bottom is Swift. I don't even want to think about how we would have tried to implement this in Java 6. And I keep mentioning Java 6 because that is like the official Android Java that's in support. Like you can leverage features that are in Java 8, but that's a whole story. Some people know. And then, so here's another like map function from our either class. And already here you can see in some ways that Kotlin expression can even be a little cleaner than Swift sometimes. So yeah, this is probably the first time that we can ever call a JVM language pretty. And so that's where we are now with finding harmony between iOS and Android development here at Kickstarter. Going from Android to iOS and back again with a functional stack was an effective, though lengthy learning experience that really helped us write some neat and testable code. And we're really excited to continue exploring what functional programming can unlock for us as Android and iOS engineers. That's so cheesy. And if you haven't already, both of our apps are fully open source on GitHub. If you just go to github.com/kickstarter/android-oss, iOS, whatever, I can send you the links. And yeah, and we love hearing from everyone too because it helps make our code better. This is my stuff, we're hiring. Do you have any questions? Do we have time for questions?
How long did that?
I forget, was it like 8 months? 6 months. Because we paused Android development and then jumped on as a team of 4 or 5 to just totally do Swift.